Hey guys, today I've got something exciting for you. A full 6S 5-inch freestyle build with the DJI O3 system. I'm gonna walk you through the whole process, step by step, so even if you're completely new to FPV, you're gonna be just fine. I remember when I started, all the parts, like frames, motors, stacks, it was overwhelming. But don't worry, this isn't some ultra low-budget build where you're just hoping it'll fly. This quad is meant to last. It's solid, reliable, and perfect if you're getting into digital FPV. We'll talk more about the cost later on, so definitely stick around till the end. It's worth it. Alright, so first off, Mepsking was super cool and sent me their 2207 neon motors for free to check out. Big thanks to them. These freestyle motors are on sale right now for just 11 bucks. And honestly, at that price, you really can't go too wrong. This one's the 2050 kV version. They look fantastic too. This one's neon pink, but they also come in neon yellow and a few other kV options as well. If you want to dive into all the specs, like how much current they draw or how much thrust they produce, you can check that out on their website. They've got ESCs, flight controllers, full kits, whole setup, basically. Oh, and if you want to save a little extra cash, I've got a coupon code for you. 10% off. I'll drop that down in the description. Moving on, we also have a complete stack from Dolphin RC, which they sent over as well. It's a 60 amp ESC paired with an F405 flight controller, and it sells for about 60 bucks. A great deal, as long as it performs well. We'll find out in the flight section later. Interestingly, the F405 is generally considered better than the F411, so it's great to see they used the 405 here. You're getting 6 UARTs, one soft serial TX, a 16 megabyte black box, and an AM32 ESC, which personally I'm a big fan of. AM32 is gaining traction and I'm convinced it'll soon become a standard. And just so you know, I'm not getting paid for this video. Everything you hear is my honest, unfiltered opinion, good or bad. The stack comes with a bunch of extras. A medium-sized capacitor, silicon dampers, and a whole bunch of different cables with pre-soldered connectors. Okay, now let's talk about the frame. We're building the Mark 5X frame. Hands down my favorite freestyle frame, and you can grab it on AliExpress for about 20 bucks. It's not the original GEP RC frame, just a clone. But for a budget build, that's absolutely fine. If you want to see the real GEP RC Mark 5 Pro Dead Cat build, I covered that in another video. I'll link it below. For the VTX, we're using the DJI O3. I know it's not exactly budget friendly, and it's getting harder to find new, but in my opinion it still delivers the best experience out there, which is why I'm using it. If you're looking to save money, a used CATX Vista is a solid alternative. You can find those for around 60 bucks these days. The build doesn't really change whether you use an O3 or a Vista, so feel free to choose whichever fits your setup. For the receiver, we're using a 2.4 GHz ExpressLRS receiver from Sologood, the cheapest option I could find on AliExpress at the time. Since we're building a freestyle quad and not aiming for long range, it's more than enough. You can order the frame with pre-printed TPU parts or without these parts. I personally go without because I like to 3D print custom pieces on my Voron Zero to better match my needs, like a strong front bumper, motor protectors, a custom DJI O3 mount I designed myself, and a clean antenna mount. As a beginner though, I recommend getting the frame with the 3D printed parts included. If you're building with a Vista, don't worry, I've designed the mount for that too. Links to all files will be in the description. Also, if you're flying with an Action 2, you can add a specific mount for it, or just use it as an extra battery protector if you're flying without a camera. Since I've been flying a lot of Bandos lately, my builds have a bit more TPU than usual, but honestly, TPU is always a personal choice. You can add as much or as little as you want depending on your flying style. And finally, props. For this build, I'm running the HQ Prop Ethix S4s. And if you're new to FPV and feeling a little overwhelmed by all the parts and terminology, don't worry, I get it. When I first started, I had no idea what I was doing either. That's exactly why I make videos like this, to help you get started and hopefully make your journey into FPV a little easier. Alright, enough talking. Let's get into what you're gonna need for this build. First off, grab yourself a nice big table. Trust me, you're gonna want plenty of space to spread everything out. For the frame, you're gonna need a set of hex drivers. I also like to use a little electric screwdriver. This thing's kinda become my go-to for every build now. Just makes life easier. You'll also need an 8mm nut driver for the props and a little craft knife, super handy for all the small stuff. Now for soldering, make sure you've got a good set of precision side cutters, a wire stripper, some quality flux, solid solder, and a decent soldering iron with a few different tips. We're gonna need a bigger tip for the XT60 connector and a smaller one for the ELRS receiver. So yeah, tip size matters here. Something else you're definitely gonna want: tape. I personally use cloth tape for the motor wires. I'll link the one I use down in the description. Zip ties are always good to have around too. You never have enough zip ties, right? Also, we're gonna need a bit of sandpaper for the frame to clean up the edges and some thread locker for the screws, because the last thing you want is stuff rattling loose mid-flight. And here's a pro tip that can literally save you hundreds of dollars. Grab yourself a smoke stopper. You plug it in between your battery and your quad, and if there's a short or something's wrong, it'll trip like a fuse and then stop the power. Seriously, it's a lifesaver. Alright, let's get started. Pretty much every FPV build begins with the frame, and if this is your first time building one, I highly recommend just putting the whole thing together first, before doing anything else. Number 1, it's honestly the most fun part of the build. And number 2, once it's all laid out, you'll have a much better idea where everything goes later on. Now, with cheaper frames, you'll sometimes run into this. They're not always super well finished out of the box. And hey, that's how they save money, right? That helps avoid tiny carbon splinters getting into your fingers later. What I like to do is take some 320 grit sandpaper and lightly go over all the carbon edges. And that way, you're not digging tiny carbon splinters out of your fingers for the rest of the day. Trust me, worth it. So I usually start by laying out all the parts I need, just making sure I've got everything on the table before I start. A rough layout really helps a lot when you're building. It just makes things go smoother. Then I put together the 2 base plates. There's a bunch of different ways to build a frame, and after doing this a dozen times, this is the way that just works best for me. Okay, first up, we drop in the center screw to secure the carbon X plate to both base plates. Then we slide in the arms from the sides and screw those down as well. The front and back arms are actually not the same. You'll see this little notch here that tells them apart. The hole spacing is slightly different too, so just double check before you tighten everything down. Cheap frame kits usually don't come with thread locker on the bolts, so I like to add a bit of my own, just to keep things from loosening up mid-flight. Don't overdo it though. A little goes a long way. I kind of forgot to add thread locker to that screw earlier, so I backed it out a bit and added it after the fact. Probably not the official way to do it, but hey, it works. Next, we move up a level, literally. Time to install the standoffs. The standoffs only go in the back part of the frame. That's where your video transmitter is gonna sit later. For the standoffs, you'll need the longer M3 screws. The kit comes with 5 short M3 screws for the base plate threads, and the longer ones are used where you're going through both bottom plates and the arms. Just make sure you're using the right ones in the right spots. It's easy to mix them up. Every now and then, I go back and tighten the screws by hand. Power drivers are great for speed, but I always do the final torque by hand, just to be safe. Next up, the camera cage. You'll use the short M3 screws in the front and the longer ones in the back. These aluminum side plates actually have an inside and an outside, so make sure you've got them facing the right way. Alright, now it's finally starting to look like an actual quad. Next comes this small spacer that connects the 2 aluminum side plates. Simply tighten 1 screw on each side and you're done. Now let's install the screws for the stack. That's your ESC and flight controller. On more expensive frames, these usually come with press-fit nuts in the carbon, but with budget kits like this one, you get basic nylon lock nut. I went ahead and added a little thread locker to those as well. And finally, the top plate goes on. I've already mounted the anti-slip pad here. I didn't punch out all the holes on purpose. That way, the battery has more surface to grip and stays put during flight. These little countersunk screws are for the top plates. No way to mix these up. This is the only kind included in the kit. Alright, now we're mounting this small carbon plate on top of the camera cage. You can use this to mount accessories, but we've got something completely different planned for it later. Now I'm gonna take a bunch of this stuff back off again, since the next step is soldering. Let's go. Alright, so I've now taken off everything we don't need for the next steps, just keeping the workspace clean and avoiding anything that could get in the way later. First thing we're gonna do is mount the motors with some TPU motor protectors. These little guys are great if you're flying bandos or doing sketchy freestyle stuff. Gives your motors just a bit more protection when things get rough. Next up, we're dropping in the silicone grommets for the ESC. Bit fiddly at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's easy. When I solder, I always follow this order. Motors first, then the XT60, and finally all the finer stuff, like VTX and flight controller. Why? Because by the time you get to the XT60, the ESC is already warmed up, makes it easier to get a solid joint. Since everything is now sitting exactly where it'll stay, we can go ahead and trim the wires to length, strip them, and solder them on. When cutting the motor wires, leave them a little longer than you think you need. You can always trim them down later. Can't add length once they're gone. When stripping the wires, don't go overboard, but don't be too shy either. You want just enough exposed wire to cover the whole ESC pad for a solid connection. Okay, after that, twist the strands together. Keeps everything neat and avoids little flyaway wires. One important tip, tape off your ESC before soldering. Tiny bits of solder, like micro droplets, can flick off and land in bad places. And if one of those shorts something out when you plug in the battery, yeah, it's not gonna be pretty. When it comes to soldering, the learning curve is steep, but once you figure out that you need a lot of heat, it all clicks. Then, even as a beginner, you'll start getting decent results. I don't call myself a soldering expert, seriously. Some of you have commented on my builds saying my soldering looks easy. Honestly, I just aim for functional. I'm not winning any awards here, but I've never had a joint fail in the air. That said, soldering can be the most frustrating part of the build, especially the first time around. If it holds, that's a win. Don't stress it too much. So here's my little pep talk. Just give it a shot. Take advice, ignore the trolls. I've seen way too many beginners get bashed in forums or on social media for their early soldering attempts. It's really disheartening, and honestly, there's no place for that. Every hobby has people like that, unfortunately. But don't let it keep you from diving into this amazing FPV world. If this is your first time soldering, I'd really recommend practicing on a scrap board first. Not just with small signal wires, but with thick ones too. That way you get used to handling both. Now, let's move on to the XT60. This one takes a bit more patience. But first, let's solder on the capacitor. One cool thing about this frame, we've got just enough clearance to fit the cap right under the O3. I actually designed these O3 mounts specifically with that in mind. The original GAP RC frame has more cutout space here, which gives you a bit more room for the cap and VTX wiring, but this one works too. Once the cap legs are in place, cover them with heat shrink for insulation, then mount the capacitor to the ESC. Now for the XT60 wires, we're gonna prep the pads with a bit of flux first, heat them up, and tin them. After that, we solder the wires straight onto the pads. Don't be shy with the heat here, XT60 needs it. Just make sure the solder really flows and bonds with the pad. If it doesn't, the joint can break later under stress. Once everything's soldered, clean up the board. Best way to do that, isopropyl alcohol. That'll get rid of any leftover flux residue. And there you go. You just knocked out one of the toughest parts of the whole build. Nicely done. Alright, time to test if we did everything right with the soldering. And to avoid any nasty surprises, we're using a smoke stopper. This little device plugs in between your battery and the ESC. It acts kinda like a fuse. If something's wrong and there's too much current, it cuts the power before anything fries. So if everything's working correctly, the smoke stopper stays on, you don't see any magic smoke, and your ESC plays that startup tone through the motors. Alright, the next steps are a bit easier. We're gonna mount the flight controller. First, let's grab the receiver. In our case, it's an ELRS receiver. When soldering this tiny little board, it really helps to hold it in place. If you don't have a soldering jig, like this one here, just tape it down somewhere. Otherwise, it's gonna slide around and drive you nuts. We're soldering 4 wires, power to power, ground to ground, and then RX on the receiver to TX on the FC, and vice versa. Pretty straightforward. Once that's done, we're setting both parts aside for now and moving on to the next step. Why? I'll show you in a second. This next bit is something I haven't seen in a lot of other build videos. And honestly, I think it's a pretty solid tip, but more on that in a minute, trust me. Next up, we're installing the video transmitter, in our case, a DJI O3. This is a digital HD VTX that can even record in up to 4K. Of course, you could use a different digital VTX here too. I'm leaving analog out for now. There are some small but important differences when building for analog, and that's a whole separate topic. The O3 comes mostly pre-assembled, so all we really need to do is plug in the connector, except for the S-bus wire. If you're using your own receiver and you've got Betaflight set up to use ELRS and S-Bus on the same UART, you'll need to remove the S-Bus wire from the connector. You can either pull the pin out of the plug or just snip the wire. Personally, I like to remove it cleanly from the connector. That way I can reuse it later if I ever need it. And that brings us to FPV build rule number 1, improvise. Every build is different. When you're building something from scratch, you're always going to have to adjust things. In this case, we have to trim the TPU mount for the O3 just a little. Otherwise, the two TPU parts won't fit together properly. Once that's done, we can unplug the UFL antennas from the air unit, thread them through the TPU, and reconnect them. Be very careful when unplugging the UFL connectors. If you pull too hard or at the wrong angle, you could rip the socket right off the board. Alright, next up, we're gonna route the antenna cables through the TPU mount and plug those UFL connectors back into the O3. Now we just pressed the TPU O3 antenna mount onto the standoffs. It should sit nice and snug. Next, we'll route the ELRS receiver antenna through the TPU mount and secure the receiver itself using heat shrink tubing. Now onto the flight controller. Just like before, we're adding silicone gummies, help reduce vibrations. And make sure the arrow on the FC is pointing forward. That sets the orientation for the gyro. We'll connect the O3 air unit to the flight controller using the same cable we just modified by removing the S-Bus wire. The air unit itself gets pressed into the TPU holder. Then we tuck the O3 camera cable between the FC and the ESC. You'll see why in a minute. We're also routing the receiver wire through that same space. You can mount the flight controller in a different orientation than the default, but you'll have to configure that in Betaflight. I've shown how to do that in my other builds. Check the info card for a link. The receiver sits right here next to the air unit. If it fits this snugly, you don't even need to tape it down. It won't go anywhere. Whether you're using ELRS or Crossfire doesn't matter for the build. They both connect via serial. Just make sure to choose one system and stick with it. ESC and FC get connected using the included cable. At this point, we've done the bulk of the build. This kit includes two different types of silicone dampers, but only one fits the O3 camera mount. Mounting the camera is pretty self-explanatory. Just use 2 screws on each side through the dampers. As for camera tilt, don't go too aggressive right away. If you start with a steep angle, you'll constantly feel like you have to fly fast. Take your time and find an angle that feels right for your style. We're on the home stretch now. We'll secure the flight controller using lock nuts, tighten them just enough so the FC is held firmly in place. But don't over-tighten. The silicone dampers still need room to absorb vibrations. Okay, now we just install the top plate, props, and battery straps. Important tip, always use 2 battery straps on a 5-inch quad. One strap just isn't enough. Your battery will fly out on every crash. And this is exactly why I like to run the cables between the FC and ESC. Otherwise, the battery straps end up pressing right against them. The straps move a lot during use, and that constant friction can wear down your wires over time. Worst case, you'll rub through the insulation completely. I always tape down the motor wires last. Honestly, taping the wires is kind of satisfying and relaxing to me. But hey, see for yourself. Alright, let's jump into Betaflight and get the basics set up. But before we do that, real quick, we're gonna enter the password in the web interface of our ELRS receiver. That way, your radio can actually talk to the quad. Super important. Okay, first thing, head over to the Ports tab. We need to set the right UART for our receiver. So find the one it's soldered on and enable serial RX. Done? Next, we'll go into the presets tab and grab a profile for the DJI O3. Just search for it, tell it which UART it's on, apply the preset, and that's it. Now let's set up some very important settings for ELRS in Betaflight. Again, we'll go to presets, search for ExpressLRS, and pick the one that matches the packet rate you're using. I'm running 250 Hz on my radio, so I'm picking 250 Hz here too. By default, ELRS is set to 500 Hz, so double check what your radio is doing before you go further. Once that's done, tick the checkboxes for serial receiver and HD Freestyle, and we're good. Now we hop over to the motors tab, and listen, do not have props on your quad when you're here. Seriously, we're just checking if the motor direction is set up correctly. You can use the motor direction wizard, super handy. Just make sure the actual spin direction matches the little diagram here. Oh, and don't have reversed checked unless you really know what you're doing. I made that mistake once and, yeah, did some weird stuff when I tried to arm. Learned that the hard way. Okay, next step's a little more advanced. If your ESC supports D-Shot, and in our case it does, we're gonna set it to D-Shot 300. This also lets us turn on the RPM filter under the PID tab, which helps with smoother flight performance. That's it. No need to mess with anything else in here for now. If you're just getting started, seriously, keep things simple. Fly with the stock PIDs. They're usually fine, especially with a well-built quad. Then, over time, you can learn and tweak stuff as you go. Last thing, we'll set up some modes. So, which switch on your radio do you want for arming? I'd also recommend setting up a beeper. And please, for the love of everything, set up crash flip. It'll save your butt. And that's it. We're basically ready for our first test flight. But before we do that, there's one more thing I want to talk about. Alright, let's talk real quick about cost. You can actually build this thing for around 150 bucks if you go with a budget analog VTX and grab the rest of the parts using my coupon codes down in the description. If you're starting out like I did with the analog C2X kit, this could be a super affordable upgrade path into a full-blown 5-inch freestyle rig. Honestly, it's a solid step up without breaking the bank. And if you're curious what I spent in my first year of FPV, I've got a full breakdown in another video. So check that out if you want to see what this hobby really costs when you're just getting started. Okay, alright. Let's see what these motors can actually do when paired with this stack. To be honest, I'm actually surprised how well this thing flies, especially at this price point. Performance-wise, I couldn't really tell the difference compared to my usual setups, and it just rips. No compromises so far. But here's the thing, for me it's all about durability. My T-motors and the SpeedyB stack survived months of straight-up bando bashing, so I'm hoping this setup can take the same kind of beating. If it does, then we've got a seriously good alternative right here. The motors hit just as hard as I'm used to. Plenty of punch, no complaints. And the Dolphin RC stack, so far so good. No dropouts, no weird behavior during PID tuning, it just works. And at this price point, I'm honestly impressed. Let me know down in the comments what matters most to you when you're picking components. That way, I can maybe focus future reviews more on what you care about. Because, let's be real, it depends what you're building for. A freestyle motor needs to take hits, while a long-range build is all about efficiency. For freestyle though, I couldn't care less if I fly 3 minutes or 3 minutes 30. That's not the point for me. What I care about is durability. I don't want a bell that bends on the first crash, and the stack better keep running even if I lawn dart into the ground. And that's what really matters to me, durability and price. I'm not gonna put a $35 motor on my freestyle rig if I can get something just as solid for half that. That's just my 2 cents. Curious what your priorities are. I'll keep you guys updated on how these parts hold up over time, what breaks first, and when the first issues pop up. If you don't want to miss that, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I might also drop a community post or two with pics so you can see how the components are holding up after some real-world abuse. Alright, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.